welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello, everyone.
We are Mark and Jane, and this is another part of our Spiritual Deepenings series.
Mm-hmm.
In these deep dives, we basically take significant texts from the Baha'i writings. You know, the kind that really rewards a closer look.
Right, the ones with layers.
Exactly. And we try to unpack them with you, our listener. We look into the meaning, the history behind them, the symbolism, all of that.
And really, our job alongside you is just to explore this material together. You've got the source text, and we're here to sort of help navigate it, point out some key things, maybe clarify tricky parts.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully help you see these writings in a way that feels, well, fresh and relevant for today.
Absolutely.
So, today we're focusing on a really powerful piece, The Golden Age of the Cause of Bahá'u'lláh by Shoghi Effendi.
Mm-hmm.
It's a specific letter taken from that larger collection, The World Order of Bahá'u'lláh.
And it's a significant one, the timing especially.
Right. He wrote it in 1932,
and
it was addressed directly to the Baha'is in the United States and Canada.
Yeah, 1932. You really need to hold that date in mind. It tells you so much. The whole Baha'i world was in this huge transition.
How so?
Well, Abdu'l-Bahá, Baha'u'llah's son, the center of the covenant, he'd passed away only about 10 years earlier, back in 1921.
A massive event for the community.
Huge. And Shoghi Effendi, his grandson, was appointed guardian. He was young, facing this immense task of guiding a community that was, grieving this central figure they absolutely revered.
And at the same time, they were just starting to build the actual structures of the Baha'i administration worldwide, something completely new.
Exactly. So think about the backdrop. The world's dealing with the Great Depression, political turmoil, heading towards another war.
And internally, the Baha'is are grappling with this loss, plus trying to figure out how to build these new institutions Shoghi Effendi was guiding them to create.
It's written right in the middle of all that pressure, a really demanding moment.
So our plan for this deep dive is to take this specific letter and, drawing only from what Shoghi Effendi actually says in it, explore what he's conveying about the faith's nature, its unique power, its history.
And importantly, the responsibilities he saw for the believers living in what he calls this golden age.
We want to go deeper than just a summary, really get into the insights he's offering.
It feels a bit like opening a time capsule, doesn't it? From such a critical moment. But the principles inside, they feel timeless, still so relevant.
Totally. But, to really get a feel for it, we should probably just hear some of it first.
Good idea. Reading the text itself sets the tone.
Okay. It's quite formal in style, as his writings often are, but it carries real weight. I'll read the opening address in the first 4 paragraphs. This sets up who he's talking to and introduces the main themes. Reading, adopting a slightly more formal tone. The Golden Age of the Cause of Bahá'u'lláh. To the beloved of God and the handmaids of the merciful throughout the United States and Canada, friends and fellow defenders of the faith of Baha'u'llah. The Golden Age of the Cause of Bahá'u'lláh. To the beloved of God and the handmaids of the merciful throughout the United States and Canada, friends and fellow defenders of the faith of Baha'u'llah. 1. Significant as have been the changes that have lately overtaken the swiftly awakening humanity at this transitional phase of its checkered history, the steady consolidation of the institutions which the administrators of the faith of Baha'u'llah are, in every land, toiling to establish, should appear no less remarkable in even those who are as yet imperfectly acquainted with the obstacles they have had to surmount or the meager resources on which they could rely.
The Golden Age of the Cause of Baha'u'lláh, to the beloved of God and the handmaids of the merciful throughout the United States and Canada, friends and fellow defenders of the faith of Baha'u'llah. 2. That a faith which 10 years ago was severely shaken by the sudden removal of an incomparable master should have, in the face of tremendous obstacles, maintained its unity, resisted the malignant onslaught of its ill-wishers, silenced its calumniators, broadened the basis of its far-flung administration, and raised upon it institutions symbolizing its ideals of worship and service, should be deemed sufficient evidence of the invincible power with which the Almighty has chosen to invest it from the moment of its inception. The Golden Age of the Cause of Bahá'u'lláh, to the beloved of God and the handmaids of the merciful throughout the United States and Canada, friends and fellow defenders of the faith of Baha'u'llah. 3. That the cause associated with the name of Baha'u'llah feeds itself upon those hidden springs of celestial strength, which no force of human personality, whatever its glamour, can replace.
That its reliance is solely upon that mystic source, with which no worldly advantage, be it wealth, fame, or learning, can compare. That it propagates itself by ways mysterious and utterly at variance with the standards accepted by the generality of mankind will, if not already apparent, become increasingly manifest as it forges ahead towards fresh conquests in its struggle for the spiritual regeneration of mankind. The golden age of the cause of Bahá'u'lláh, to the beloved of God and the handmaids of the merciful throughout the United States and Canada, friends and fellow defenders of the faith of Bahá'u'lláh. 4. Indeed, how could it, unsupported as it has ever been by the counsels and the resources of the wise, the rich, and the learned in the land of its birth, have succeeded in breaking asunder the shackles that weighed upon it at the hour of its birth, in emerging unscathed from the storms that agitated its infancy, had not its animating breath been quickened by that spirit which is born of God, and on which all success, wherever and however it be sought, must ultimately depend.
Wow. Even just hearing those first paragraphs, it's dense, but so powerful.
Right. And that first contrast really hits you.
Yeah, the swiftly awakening humanity in its transitional phase. You feel the instability, the change happening everywhere in the world.
Chaos, uncertainty. But then, right against that, he puts the steady consolidation of the institutions of the faith.
Not just changing, like the rest of the world, but consolidating, building something solid, steadily.
And he argues this should seem no less remarkable than all the global upheaval, even if you don't know all the details.
Even if you don't realize the obstacles they faced or the meager resources they had.
He immediately points to that huge challenge, the sudden removal of an incomparable master, Abdu'l-Bahá, just 10 years before.
Think about that impact. Losing the person who was the absolute center, the guide, the perfect example after Baha'u'llah himself. It's the kind of thing that could shatter a community.
You'd expect it to. And yet, Shoghi Effendi says the faith didn't just survive that shock and the tremendous obstacles, things like persecution, opposition.
Right, attacks from ill-wishers, calumniators.
It actually maintained its unity, resisted the attacks, broadened its administration, and even built institutions like the House of Worship.
And for him, this resilience, this growth against all odds, isn't just impressive planning.
No, he calls it sufficient evidence of the invincible power God invested the faith with from the moment of its inception.
That's key, from the moment of its inception. It wasn't something earned later, it was there from the start, a divine endowment.
Which leads right into paragraph 3, where he gets specific about the source of that power.
And it's explicitly not what you might expect.
Not human personality, no matter how charismatic or famous someone is.
Nope. Not worldly advantage, either not wealth, not fame, not academic learning. These aren't the fuel.
So what is?
He says its reliance is solely upon that mystic source, those hidden springs of celestial strength, the spirit which is born of God.
It's fundamentally spiritual, otherworldly, almost. Completely different from how worldly movements gain traction.
And because its power source is different, its methods are different too.
Yeah, he says it propagates itself by ways mysterious and utterly at variance with the standards accepted by the generality of mankind.
Ways mysterious. I love that phrase. It implies something beyond human calculation or strategy.
Not marketing campaigns, not political deals, not military force. The usual ways ideas spread or groups gain power.
It suggests things like spiritual attraction, lives being changed from the inside out, maybe divine confirmations, things you can't easily measure or control.
And he circles back to this in paragraph 4. He asks rhetorically, how could the faith possibly have survived its birth in Persia? Remember, he later calls it a land of unrestrained fanaticisms. How could it break those shackles and survive the storms of its infancy?
Especially since it was unsupported by the powerful, the wealthy, the learned people of that society.
How could it do any of that unless its animating breath came from that spirit which is born of God?
He presents its very survival and early growth as proof of this divine life force, and then adds that all real success ultimately depends on that same spirit.
So these opening paragraphs really set the stage by redefining power. The faith's strength isn't external, it's internal, spiritual, mysterious, divinely given.
Exactly, which really changes how you look at things.
And for you listening, just sit with that for a second. If the faith's power isn't about numbers or resources in the usual sense, but this celestial strength, how does that change your view?
Does it affect how you see the challenges the faith might face, maybe even in your own community? Or how you think about your own efforts?
It kind of suggests that connecting with that spiritual source, that reliance on God, might be more fundamental than perfecting, say, administrative techniques, though those are important too.
Puts the emphasis elsewhere. It's a profound starting point.
Okay, so Building on that idea of inherent power and unique character, Shoghi Effendi then zooms in on the faith's origins, the very beginning.
Right, back to Persia. And he's very direct about how difficult it was. No sugarcoating.
He mentions the heart-rending details of that appalling tragedy, the birth pangs.
And his description of Persia at that time, unrestrained fanaticisms, its crass ignorance, its unbridled cruelty. He paints a picture of a really hostile environment.
It makes the emergence of the faith seem even more miraculous, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It underscores the difficulty. But then against that darkness, he highlights the first believers, the heroes.
Their valor, their sublime fortitude, and the unnumbered martyrs.
People who literally faced death, often brutal deaths, for their belief.
He says they sealed with their lifeblood the early triumphs of the faith. Their sacrifice wasn't just tragic. It actively built the foundation for the future. It paved the way for its approaching victory.
This whole period he labels the heroic age.
The age of heroes and martyrs, defined by that kind of ultimate courage against violent opposition. Powerful stuff.
But then he makes a really interesting pivot. He brings it forward to his time, the 1930s, and looks at the believers in America and Canada.
Yes, and he gives them this incredible title. Champion builders of the organic structure of the cause.
Champion builders. It shifts the focus, doesn't it? From heroism in the face of death to the heroism of building the institutions, the administration.
And he makes this astonishing statement that their work in this strenuous period of establishing the administrative order is no less meritorious than the sacrifices of those early martyrs.
Wow. Just pause on that. Building assemblies, serving on committees, contributing to funds, teaching the faith systematically. Shoghi Effendi is saying the spiritual value, the merit of that kind of dedicated work and sacrifice
is comparable to giving your life for the faith in the heroic age.
That's huge. Think about what that means for anyone involved in Baha'i community life today. Your efforts, your time, your resources given to building and maintaining the community. It has that level of spiritual significance.
He really elevates the act of collective building, and he connects it to the destiny of North America, too.
Right. He brings in that quote from Abdu'l-Bahá, calling North America the land where the splendors of his light shall be revealed, where the righteous will abide and the free assemble.
It gives their efforts a special weight, a prophetic significance in the global story of the faith.
And then he lists why he calls them champion builders. What had they actually done by 1932?
It's quite a list. Their loyalty after Abdu'l-Bahā's passing, their generosity sending aid to the suffering Baha'is back in Persia.
Practical help. Also, resisting attacks on the faith, defending it, and, critically, actually building those administrative bodies, the National Assembly, local assemblies, committees, the financial systems needed.
Plus, intervening for persecuted Baha'is elsewhere. He mentions Russia and Egypt specifically, showing that global awareness.
Their pioneering work taking the faith to new places. And a big one he returns to later, making progress on building the Mashri'ql-Adhkár, the house of worship near Chicago.
So you see these two modes of service being presented side by side. The heroic age martyrs facing external violence, laying the foundation with their blood.
And this golden age, this phase of it, focused on building the internal structure, defending the faith differently, sacrificing for projects like the temple, both requiring immense dedication, both spiritually meritorious.
And by listing these services right after talking about the martyrs, he kind of sets up a question, doesn't he? He asks later if these modern services approach the high standard of the past heroes.
It's both praise and a challenge. Like, look what you've achieved. It's amazing. Now, remember the standard of sacrifice set by those who came before. It pushes you to think about what real service means in this age.
And this whole discussion, worldly power versus spiritual power, different kinds of sacrifice, it leads him straight into talking about how we should judge the faith's worth.
Yeah, and he offers a set of criteria that are completely countercultural, especially today.
He says explicitly, do not judge the faith by the usual metrics. How much money does it have? How many members? What immediate, tangible stuff does it give people?
Forget the usual scorecards. The world loves numbers, resources, quick results. He says that's not the real measure here.
So what is the real measure, according to this letter?
He gives this amazing list. The purity of its precepts, the sublimity of its standards, the integrity of its laws, the reasonableness of its claims, the comprehensiveness of its scope, the universality of its program, the flexibility of its institutions, the lives of its founders, the heroism of its martyrs, and the transforming power of its influence.
Wow. Let's unpack that a bit. It's all about inherent quality and impact.
Exactly. Purity are the teachings untainted. Sublimity, how high are the ideals? Integrity, are the laws just, consistent? Reasonableness, do the claims make sense?
Comprehensiveness, universality, does it cover all of life for everyone? Flexibility, can the institutions adapt?
And crucially, the lives of the founders and martyrs, do they exemplify the teachings? And the transforming power, does it actually change people and society for the better?
It shifts the whole focus from external appearance to internal reality and actual effect.
Then he contrasts this sharply with what he calls man-created movements.
And he doesn't mince words there. He calls them temporary, based on human desires, seeking mortal dominion.
They rely on surface appeal, novelty, playing on baser instincts, using the resources of a sordid world.
He says they might look impressive for a bit, shine for a while, but because they lack that divine root and rely on fleeting human trends or power games,
they ultimately decline and perish.
It's a stark distinction between something divinely ordained, aiming for eternal truth and transformation, and something humanly devised, focused on temporary gains and destined to fade.
So for you listening again, think about applying these criteria Shoghi Effendi lists: purity, sublimity, integrity, transformation, heroism.
If you use that yardstick to evaluate movements or social trends or even your own goals today, how would that change things?
It definitely challenges the way the world usually measures success and impact, doesn't it? It asks you to look much, much deeper.
It really does. Okay, so moving on from how to evaluate the faith, Shoghi Effendi then places it within the big picture of religious history.
Right. He compares its early progress with past religions, particularly Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
And he argues that what the Baha'i Faith achieved in its first, say, 80-odd years by 1932 was pretty remarkable, especially given where it started.
He lists things like, breaking free from the dominance of Islamic clergy in Persia, those shackles, declaring itself openly as a new independent faith.
Spreading to many countries, establishing its institutions, building the houses of worship like the one in Wilmette.
Even gaining recognition from governments, royalty, getting positive legal rulings in high courts. That's pretty fast development for a religion born in such intense persecution.
And then he contrasts this with some of the challenges faced by earlier religions in their formative years.
Yeah, he talks about things like internal divisions, rivalries, betrayals that happen early on in Christianity or Islam, for example.
He also mentions the gradual assimilation of external philosophical ideas like Greek philosophy or Mithraic elements influencing early Christian thought, or early Jewish converts to Christianity still holding on to parts of the Mosaic law for a time.
Or how early church structures sometimes mirrored Roman civic models rather than arising purely from the religious teachings themselves.
Now, he's careful here. The point isn't to say those faiths were flawed in their divine origin.
No, not at all. He makes that very clear later with progressive revelation.
But he is suggesting that, historically, the Baha'i Faith, in its early phase, showed a really striking degree of internal unity and adherence to the original teachings, despite the external pressures. He calls it an undeviating loyalty in guarding the purity of the message.
And steadfastness against that powerful religious orthodoxy it emerged from.
He even brings up how Baha'is viewed contemporary events, like the fall of the Ottoman Sultanate and the Caliphate. They saw these major geopolitical shifts through the lens of their own scriptures and prophecies, finding a kind of satisfaction that aligned with their understanding of history unfolding according to a divine plan.
So the comparison serves to highlight a unique characteristic of the Baha'i Faith's early development, its relative cohesion and doctrinal purity compared to the historical complexities faced by previous dispensations. He attributes this in part to the specific nature of this age and the potency of Baha'u'llah's revelation.
Which leads perfectly into the core principle that explains this whole relationship. Progressive revelation.
Yes, he lays it out so clearly. The Baha'i revelation abrogates none of the religions that have preceded it.
It doesn't cancel them out. It doesn't distort their features or to belittle their value. It doesn't try to dwarf any of the prophets of the past.
This is fundamental. It's not about replacing and discarding. It's about fulfilling and building upon. He even says its purpose is to help people of other faiths gain a fuller understanding of their own religion.
How does that work?
Through the core principle. Religious truth is not absolute, but relative, that divine revelation is progressive, not final.
Okay, unpack that. Relative, not absolute. Progressive, not final.
Think of it like education. What you teach a child in first grade is true, but it's not the whole picture you'd teach a university student. The truth unfolds progressively as our capacity to understand grows. Divine revelation is like that for humanity.
So God reveals truth in stages, appropriate for humanity's level of maturity at different times in history.
Exactly. It's the same essential spiritual truth from the same divine source, but expressed differently and more fully over time. He quotes Baha'u'lláh from the Kitab-i-Quran here.
The Book of Certitude.
Right. Baha'u'lláh says, all the prophets of God abide in the same tabernacle, soar in the same heaven, are seated upon the same throne, utter the same speech, and proclaim the same faith.
That's powerful. They are fundamentally one, aspects of the same reality.
Which means revelation is continuous. It has, as Baha'u'lláh says, a beginning that hath no beginning, and an end that hath no end.
So the idea that revelation could just stop.
Is seen as sheer blasphemy, quoting the Bab. Divine guidance is ongoing.
And Baha'u'llah explains why it's progressive, using that beautiful analogy of the sun.
Yes, from the Ikhwan again, paragraph 22. The sun of truth. God's knowledge is always there, always shining, but the amount of light we receive, the intensity of the revelation given to humanity.
Depends on our spiritual capacity at the time, our readiness.
Like the physical sun. At dawn, the light is gentle, it increases gradually towards noon. If the full midday sun suddenly appeared at sunrise,
It would be overwhelming, damaging. Human understanding would waste away and be consumed, as the quote says.
So God, in his wisdom, gives us truth progressively, in doses we can handle and that meet the specific needs of the age.
That makes so much sense, and it's why Baha'is don't claim their revelation is the absolute final word, or intrinsically superior, in essence, to past ones, para 23.
Right. It's the fuller measure of light needed for this stage of humanity's development. It honors the past light while providing what's needed now.
So for you listening, think about that idea of progressive, ongoing revelation. If truth unfolds over time, what does that mean about how we view different religions, or how we approach truth itself?
It fosters a really inclusive and dynamic view of spiritual history, doesn't it? An expectation of continued learning and growth.
Definitely. Now, within this framework of progressive revelation, Shoghi Effendi highlights something unique about the Bab.
Yes, this is a really distinct feature of Baha'i belief. The Bab isn't seen just as a forerunner or prophet who predicted Baha'u'llah.
He's recognized as a direct manifestation of God in his own right.
With a specific, immense potency. Shoghi Effendi says, he was endowed with a potency such as no founder of any of the past religions was allowed to possess.
And this isn't just a Baha'i interpretation. He says this high station is attested by the Bab himself, by Baha'u'llah, and by Abdu'l-Bahá.
He uses that symbolic quote from the Ikhwan, para 30, about knowledge being 20 and 7 letters.
Right. All the prophets before the Bab collectively revealed 2 letters.
But the Bab, according to this passage, came to reveal 20 and 5 letters.
That's an incredible leap. 25 out of 27. It's a symbolic way of showing the sheer scale and power of the Bab's revelation compared to all previous ones.
It emphasizes his unique role in preparing humanity for an unprecedented leap forward for the age of Baha'u'lláh.
And yet, paradoxically, even with this incredibly high station,
Shoghi Effendi says the Bab's revelation, his light, pales before the effulgence of that orb of unsurpassed splendor whose rise he foretold, meaning Baha'u'llah.
So it's not diminishing the Bab at all, but showing that Baha'u'llah's revelation was destined to be even greater, even more radiant for this day.
And the Bab himself knew this and proclaimed it. Shoghi Effendi quotes the Bab from the Persian Bayan, par 32.
Where the Bab speaks about him who is to come after me, Baha'u'llah, and says essentially that nothing in the Bab's own writings can adequately describe Baha'u'llah's greatness.
The herald points beyond himself to the one he heralds.
And Baha'u'llah also affirms the immense potency of his own revelation. He said the outpouring was so vast that in just one day and night, he could reveal verses equal in significance to the Bab's entire major work, the Persian Anayan, part of 33.
It conveys this sense of an overwhelming flood of divine knowledge and guidance being released through Baha'u'llah for this specific era.
So you have this unique dynamic, the Bab, a manifestation of God of immense power, acting as the gate and herald.
Preparing the world for Baha'u'llah, the promised one of all ages, whose revelation holds the full measure of guidance needed for humanity's maturity.
Understanding that specific relationship, Bab and Baha'u'llah, how does that deepen your perspective, listening now, on where the Baha'i Faith fits into the story of religion?
It's not just next in line. It's a very specific, prophesied 2-stage event designed to usher in a new era for humanity.
Okay, so after laying out all that theological and historical background, Shoghi Effendi then shifts focus quite strongly to the present, well, his present, the 1930s, and the responsibilities of the believers.
Right. He connects the power of the revelation to the conditions of the age itself. He says the achievements are partly because the age is infinitely more advanced, more receptive, and more insistent to receive an ampler measure of divine guidance. Para 26.
Humanity's capacity has grown, so the revelation needed is greater.
But he also paints that stark picture of the age, Paris 28:34. On one hand, deep helplessness, the fears and miseries. You can almost feel the anxiety of the Depression years, the political instability.
But on the other hand, stupendous advance achieved in the realm of human knowledge, of power, of skill and inventiveness. Amazing technological progress.
That gap, that tension, material progress soaring while spiritual and social well-being plummet, that's the crisis of modernity he's pointing to.
And he argues this very gap proves the need for a fresh revelation, a restatement of the divine purpose, a spiritual revival.
And crucially, the message for this age can't just be about individual morality or finding personal peace. That was enough for past ages, perhaps.
But not now. Now, he says, the revelation must embody a social code, that divine economy.
A divine economy. That's such a striking phrase. It implies a whole system, a blueprint for organizing society based on divine principles, not just guiding individual souls.
And the goal of this divine economy, to lead humanity towards an all-embracing federation.
Which he explicitly equates with establishing the kingdom of God on this earth. The aim is world unity, a new global order.
He calls the Baha'i system for achieving this, the supreme grandeur of the system unfolded by the hand of Bahá'u'lláh.
And because the system is so grand, the purpose so high, the responsibilities on those who recognize it are sacred, weighty.
He even acknowledges that maybe believers living through it are too close to fully appreciate its magnitude, like being too close to a huge mountain to see its full shape.
We're involved in the day-to-day work. It's hard to get that perspective sometimes.
Which leads him to this core responsibility, para 34. Believers must abstain from any thoughts, words, or deeds that might tend to dim its brilliance or injure its growth.
It's a call for constant self-awareness, constant effort to ensure our actions reflect the high standards of the faith and don't inadvertently harm its reputation or progress.
And he applies this responsibility very specifically to one area he says needs increasing emphasis now, particularly for Western Baha'is who are becoming more visible: non-participation in partisan politics.
Yeah, he calls this a vital instruction, and it's comprehensive.
It applies to individuals and the Baha'i institutions, assemblies, committees.
And the instruction is to abstain from any form of activity that might be interpreted as an interference in the political affairs of any particular government.
That covers a lot of ground: publications, official discussions, jobs people take, services they render, who they associate with. Basically anything that could look like taking a side in party politics or using the faith's name for a political cause.
He says the first and sacred obligation is to avoid anything, word, or deed that violates this. It requires real care and judgment.
And he outlines this twofold duty. First, actively show the faith is not political. Second, be absolutely loyal and obedient to your government in civil matters.
That's the tightrope walk, isn't it? Loyal citizen, but politically nonpartisan. How does he say that works in practice? Paras 3640.
Well, he says Baha'is need to steer clear of political parties, their specific policies, their schemes. Don't assign blame to one side. Don't promote one party's agenda. Don't identify with any system that could harm the faith's global unity.
Basically, don't get drawn into the political fray. He warns against becoming tools of unscrupulous politicians or getting entrapped by political maneuvering.
The call is to rise above it all, above all particularism and partisanship, the vain disputes, the petty calculations, the transient passions of politics.
He does make a distinction about jobs, though. Purely political posts, like diplomatic roles, should be avoided.
Right. But purely administrative government jobs, ones that aren't affected by elections and don't require political campaigning or compromising principles, those are generally okay.
The main thing is this unyielding determination to follow Baha'u'llah's path and avoid the entanglements and bickerings of politics.
But then he clarifies what this doesn't mean. Para 37. It's really important.
Yeah, it's not about being indifferent to your country.
Not about being disobedient to the government.
Not about refusing to help promote your country's true interests.
No. It's about how you serve. In an unselfish, unostentatious, and patriotic fashion, but always consistent with the faith's standards, especially integrity and truthfulness. Your primary allegiance remains with the divine principles.
And then he gives the reasons why this nonpartisanship is so critical, especially as the faith grows globally. Paras 38-39. This is key.
What are the dangers if Baha'is get involved in politics?
Okay, first, the temptation to bargain with their faith, compromising principles to gain political favor or advantage.
Second, potentially violating the country's constitution or making it seem like the Baha'i administration is trying to usurp government authority.
And third, and this is huge for a global faith, arousing suspicion or antagonism from one government or political group. Why is that so dangerous?
Because actions taken by Baha'is in one country could give governments in other countries an excuse to persecute Baha'is there. Taking sides here could literally endanger people over there.
Exactly. He asks, how else could a worldwide faith aiming to unite everyone maintain its own unity and develop peacefully if its members were entangled in all the different national political conflicts? This principle is the shield.
And he insists this isn't just about being clever or avoiding trouble, selfish expediency, he calls it. It's based on a broad principle of loyalty to the faith's core truths and ideals. 40. It's about spiritual integrity.
He knows it's hard. Difficult and delicate be our task, he admits, especially when politics seems like the main way to change things.
But he promises the sustaining power of Baha'u'llah and of his divine guidance for those who stay true to this principle. Para 41.
So for you listening, this principle is really quite unique. It sets the Baha'i community apart. How does understanding the why behind it affect how you see the role of a Baha'i citizen?
Or what are the implications, maybe, for how we might build unity in a world so torn apart by political divisions? It suggests a different way forward.
It really does, a path focused on unity above partisanship.
Okay, so finally, Shoghi Effendi brings this powerful letter to a very specific, very urgent point, completing the Mashri'ql-Adhkár, the house of worship in Wilmette, Illinois.
Yes, the focus sharpens right down to this one great enterprise, Paras 42-44. He talks about the pressing claims, the imperative necessity of getting it finished.
And at that time, the main structure was built, but the intricate dome wasn't done yet, and they needed the funds.
And he was concerned. He worried about the potential damage to the prestige of our beloved cause if it dragged on. Especially with the big Chicago World's Fair coming up in 1933, they really wanted the dome completed by then.
He acknowledges how hard it was for people. He mentions the stringency of the circumstances, the Great Depression, the embarrassments, the cares, the depleted resources. People were struggling financially.
Yet he's asking for major sacrifice for this building project during that incredibly difficult economic time. That tells you how important he saw it.
He frames it not just as a burden, but as an unprecedented character of the opportunity.
Right.
The first Baha'i temple in the West, a historic undertaking.
And he speaks of the incalculable blessings its completion would bring. And then he makes another one of those astonishing comparisons.
Which one?
He says this project, because of the sheer range and quality of the sacrifices it entailed, from ordinary believers giving what they could, it would rank among the most outstanding examples of Baha'i solidarity.
And he explicitly compares the spiritual merit of this collective sacrifice for the temple to the heroism of the martyrs in places like Nariz, Anjan, Abarsi back in the heroic age.
Think about that again. Giving your money, your effort, uniting together to build this physical structure. He elevates that collective sacrifice to the same spiritual plane as martyrdom. It shows the power of unified action in this age.
It really dignifies the contribution of every single person who gave, no matter how small.
He also adds a very personal touch. He says his plea is reinforced by the fervent plea, maybe the last entreaty of the greatest holy leaf.
Baha'u'llah's daughter, Bahi Khanum, a figure of immense spiritual standing in the community. She was elderly, her health failing.
And her deep wish was to know, before she passed away, that this temple, so dear to Abdu'l-Bahá's heart, would be completed.
That adds such emotional weight to his call.
His hope, his vision, was that by the spring of 33, that dome would be finished, standing there as a flaming beacon and a symbol of hope amidst the gloom of a despairing world.
More than just a building. A symbol. A beacon. Especially needed in those dark times.
So for you listening, what does a house of worship designed to be open to all people for prayer and service symbolize? What's its spiritual purpose?
And how does that act of collective sacrifice, everyone pitching in for something bigger than themselves, relate to building community, to spiritual growth?
And maybe, how can we today, in our own ways, strive to be that flaming beacon of hope in a world that still often feels gloomy or despairing?
Those structures really are tangible signs of the spiritual vision, aren't they?
They absolutely are. testaments to collective faith and effort.
Okay, let's try and pull these threads together. We've covered a lot in this deep dive into the golden age of the cause of Bahá'u'lláh.
We started with that core assertion: the faith's power is divine, invincible, not dependent on worldly things like wealth or personality. It comes from celestial strength.
We look back at the heroic age, the martyrs in Persia, their foundational sacrifice, and then contrasted that with the champion builders in America, whose work in establishing the administration was deemed no less meritorious. Different age, different vital contributions.
We talked about those unique criteria for judging the faith's worth. Not numbers or resources, but purity of teachings, integrity, universality, the lives of its key figures and its power to transform lives and society. A stark contrast to temporary, man-created movements.
We explored that central Baha'i principle of progressive revelation, religious truth unfolding over time through successive divine messengers, all united in essence, not replacing, but fulfilling.
And within that, the unique station of the Baba, manifestation of God himself, with unprecedented potency, preparing the way for the even fuller revelation of Baha'u'lláh, perfectly suited for humanity's coming of age.
We discussed the nature of this age, its material progress mixed with deep spiritual crisis, and how Baha'u'llah's message isn't just for individuals, but includes that social code, that divine economy designed to build a unified world, the kingdom of God on this earth.
And we spent significant time on that vital, practical principle of non-involvement in partisan politics. Its scope, the reasons behind it protecting unity, avoiding compromise, preventing persecution globally, and the high standard of loyalty and integrity it requires.
Finally, we landed on that specific call to complete the Mashri'ql-Adhkár, seeing it not just as construction, but as a powerful symbol of hope, unity, and the profound spiritual value of collective sacrifice in this golden age.
So what's the takeaway for someone engaged with the Baha'i faith today?
Well, I think this letter really reinforces your understanding of the faith's divine core, its resilience, its unique history. It highlights why this period is considered a golden age, a time with immense potential but also serious responsibilities for building that new world order.
And it gives very concrete guidance, especially on navigating politics as a citizen, emphasizing steadfastness, unity, and trust in divine help.
And for people outside the Baha'i community perhaps listening in, what does this text offer?
I think it presents the Baha'i faith as more than just another religion. It positions it as a source of hope, that flaming beacon and a practical framework, the divine economy, for tackling the world's big problems, for building unity in what Shoghi Effendi called a despairing world.
Still relevant, sadly.
It offers a different way to think about religion itself as progressive, unified. It challenges standard views of history, success, and power. It's an invitation to consider a path of spiritual regeneration for the whole planet.
It really broadens the perspective.
So as we finish up our deep dive today, here's a final thought for you to consider, drawing from the text. Shoghi Effendi wrote this nearly 100 years ago. He called that time a golden age, highlighting tasks like building the administration and the temple. But what if the golden age isn't just a past period tied to those specific initial achievements?
What if it's an ongoing reality? Right. What if it's a continuous process of building, of contributing to Baha'u'llah's plan, of manifesting the faith's power in the world? A process that demands that same spirit of self-sacrifice and concerted effort from every generation, including ours, right now. If the golden age is now, what does that mean for your efforts, your contribution to making the world better?
That's definitely something to reflect on. What does it mean to be living in and building the golden age today?
Exactly.
A powerful question to end on.
And speaking of reflection, if there are other texts from the Baha'i writings, specific letters, prayers, passages that you, our listener, would find helpful for us to explore in a future deep dive like this, please do let us know.
Yeah, we really welcome your suggestions. You can find ways to contact us on our website or through social media channels.
And of course, please remember to subscribe wherever you get your audio so you don't miss our next deep dive.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Until next time.